And we welcome everybody, and let's begin with, as we normally do, with a summary of the Parsha. Parshas Kisavoy, which I'm going to be using in different circumstances, as you can see. So it starts off with the special mitzvah of giving bikurim, which is the first fruits of the farmer. He's worked very hard, she's worked very hard, they produced. And now, before a farmer is able to partake of their own food, which they produced and worked so hard to achieve, they have to bring the very first of those fruits to the temple in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And it applies to other produce of specific nature that is grown in Israel. And it's also going to become an example for an attitude in life, which we'll come back to as well. What specific species does it apply to? The Shivat Haminim, the 7 species that are associated with Israel, that have a special status. Eretz Chita U'Sorah, V'Gefen U'Tana B'Riman, Eretz Shemen U'Dvash, it's wheat and barley and dates and figs and grapes, pomegranates and olives. These are the 7 kinds of fruits, but only that which was actually grown in Israel had to be brought to the temple. And then there was a whole drasha, a whole speech that was made by the farmer who stood with his basket in his hand in front of the Kohen, and he expressed gratitude, not only his own personal journey, but he actually goes back in history. We make reference to it on the Seder night at the Haggadah, that we go back all the way through history and we recognize that our successes are on the shoulders of the giants who preceded us in the generations before us. Then speaks about the cycles of the tithes. And the day before Pesach, in the 4th year, there's a certain declaration that I hereby declare that I have achieved and fulfilled all of my responsibilities to give the tithe. Where are we? Was I sharing a screen until now?
No.
Oh dear, which I thought I was. Okay, give me 1 second. There we go. Is that better? Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Thank you. So we're up to already number 4, where there is a cycle of tithes, which means that there's a cycle of 7 years. Every 7th year is a sabbatical year, and you could not claim the produce of your field. It belonged to everybody. Everyone shared in it. Everyone had rights in it. You do not work the field in the 7th year. But in the 6th year, leading up to the 7th year sabbatical year, in those 6 years, there were various tithes that had to be given. The first to the Kohen, which was a 40th, a 50th, or 60th, depending on how generous you were feeling. After that, you have to give 1 tithe, a 10th, to the Levi. And after that, a tithe that was either taken to Jerusalem in certain years. In the second, in the 1st and 2nd and 4th and 5th years, it was taken to Jerusalem and eaten there. And in the 3rd and 6th year of the sabbatical cycle, it had to be given to the poor. So there was a certain declaration that was made in the 4th year to say that I fulfilled all of my obligations. Then we're told generally, keep all the commandments, because there's a unique relationship between a Jew and Hashem. We chose Hashem to be our God, all the way back from Abraham, and he chose us. And there is a commitment from this side and from the other that we have to preserve. Then there's a unique commandment that is given, that when we cross the Jordan, they took stones, they plastered them, and then they engraved in those stones, in the cement that covered those stones, the entire Torah. It was left, one was left on the Jordan River, and the other one was put at Har Eval. There was actually a 3rd set of stones as well, but this was a record of the relationship between ourselves and Hashem, and our responsibility to keep the Torah. Then we are told to proclaim the blessings and the curses. From 2 mountains, there were certain parts of the Jewish people that stood in the middle of this, in the valley, the Levim, the Levim and the Kohanim, and 6 of the tribes stood on Har Eval, and 6 of the tribes stood on Har Grizim. They were opposite each other, and they announced the various blessings that would come to the Jewish people if we follow Hashem, and God forbid the opposite. And all of the nation answered, Amen, recognizing and accepting the fact that there is such a thing as blessing and the opposite of blessing, and that so much of it is determined by the choices that we make. And then we go into a very difficult part of the Parsha, which is called the Teichacha. The Teichacha is one of two times in the Torah that Hashem reproves and gives a lot of negative statements about what could befall the Jewish people if we do not follow Hashem. They're quite horrific verses. It speaks about the suffering that could, God forbid, befall the Jewish people if we neglect the mitzvahs. And in fact, it is read in shul in an undertone. The Valkyra reads it softly and fast because it is so filled with horrific situations that we should never befall the Jewish people that we don't make it a central part of the service. It's necessary, it's part of our teachings, but we rush through it. And we also don't call up anybody for that particular aliyah. So we normally honor somebody to be called up to the Torah, being that the entire section deals with curses that could befall the Jewish people and suffering in the event that we don't follow Hashem. We don't call up Ya Amod, and now we call up so-and-so to come up to the Torah, and then he gets a big mishaberach of all the different things that could go wrong. So we don't call up anybody. How do we do it? The Valkyra, the person reading the Torah, reads that section and makes the blessing himself, and nobody's called up. It's done very simply. But obviously everything is a part of Torah, and Torah only has positive messages, and therefore deep within all of these references to suffering and pain are opportunities and hidden blessings, which are the story of life. Life has revealed blessings. Sometimes we have situations that we have to decipher, we have to work through and find the real blessing that lies within. And it's sometimes more difficult and takes a learned person and a skilled person and a sensitive, a spiritual person to be able to derive the right messages. But even between these verses are hidden major messages of positive connection too. And finally, the very last section of the entire portion this week speaks about a reference to the many miracles that we did experience and that we have a responsibility to fulfill each and every mitzvah of the Torah. So we're going to move on to some of the inspirations and elements that we can apply to our own lives. And the first, we mentioned that it is important when we speak about the first fruit to realize that we're not only talking about farmers, and we're not only talking about the unique people that are in the fields reaping their produce and gathering their fruits, but in fact it is the produce of our hands on every front. Today we're less farmers than we used to be, but we are in the world of finance. We go to the office, we go to work. We all have areas that we are cultivating in our life to produce our livelihood. And there is a general theme that it is giving us, and that is the first. The very first of our accomplishments and our strengths should be given to Hashem. God should not be the afterthought, but that should be the very first address that we take our successes to. That tells us about an attitude in life that we could apply in every arena. One of the cornerposts of education that the Rabbi would emphasize time and again, and certainly became a cornerstone of the school system at my school at the Torah Academy, is that the first hours of the day one dedicates to davening, so you have early morning prayers, and after that we do the Jewish studies, Limudei Kodesh. We learn Torah. The earliest and most fresh hours, the energy that is maximum is dedicated to that which is holy. And then the day continues, and we do have energy for other things, but the other things that are important are always put in the context of what is the ultimately important element of our lives, which is our soul and our spiritual development. So it's something about priorities. Sometimes we find a leftover corner in our life for that which is holy, and sometimes we begin the day by filling our most important fresh hours with the most important elements of our life, and it's a question of then working out what is. what is the most vital, important element of our life, and what is an afterthought that one adds to everything else that is going on in our life. And that's how we communicate to our children, to our families, what our priorities are. It could be that if Manchester United and Arsenal are playing a soccer match, that could become the most important element of the week, and the kids know that you just don't even think of going near their father when such a match is taking place, because God forbid he might be distracted for a moment. But if he's at a Wednesday night cheer, then it doesn't really matter so much, because although he's learning, he could get distracted a little bit. Everybody knows what the real priority in life is. And this message of Bikurim is that the first of our fruits, the first of our energies, the best of what we have. The Rambam takes it even further extended and says, think about what kind of shul should be built. A shul should look more beautiful than your own home. And the guests that you invite into your home should have the best of what you are feeding your family. And the poor, who we often say they wouldn't really know the difference if we're going to give them caviar or not, they're very happy to get dry bread. But the attitude from our own side is not what they're ready to receive. What are we ready to give? And the best and the finest should be for a mitzvah. And then there's also what we need for ourselves. It's a question of prioritizing and how we order our lives around what is the priority in our life. So the first mitzvah is that of Bikurim, of giving the first fruit. The Rambam says that everything that is for the sake of Hashem should be from the best and the most beautiful. Now we often see somebody in Israel, you see it just before Sukkot, around about this season, in a good year. I don't know how we're going to handle Lulav and Esrog this year, because we normally purchase for the shul and everyone shares and makes a bracha on the same Lulav. This year, it's going to be a problem. I'm not actually sure. At least blowing shofar can be from a distance, but shaking the lulav is up close and personal. So I'm not sure exactly how we're going to fulfill the mitzvah. But if you're in the streets of Yerushalayim and you see these learned rabbis with long white flowing beards standing with magnifying glasses, and they're looking at an etrog, and to the untrained eye, it looks a little bit ridiculous. You know, you got an etrog, just get an etrog, and whatever it is. So you have to look with a magnifying glass. Why would anybody think of purchasing something by using a magnifying glass? Now, if, of course, they were buying a diamond ring, then the fact that the jeweler would have some eyepiece in his eye looking and scrutinizing whether there's a scratch and what grade it is and what color it is, so that would be obvious. You don't buy a diamond unless you really check that it has all the value that it should have. But when it comes to an estrog, maybe less, maybe not so important. So these are all areas in our life where there's a shift in our mind and saying what is for Hashem and what is for our spiritual growth has to be the best. We don't argue if we have tefillin, why can't I wear the tefillin of my great Zayda, which I found lying in a box? Why do I have to buy a new tefillin? Because you say to the guy, why don't you wear his suit? You say, I'm not going to wear his suit, it's out of style. You're crazy, it's shy, the pants are shiny. But the tefillin maybe yes. So all I'm saying is that we could turn our minds around and recognize that the most important things should shine as the most important things in our lives. And we should feel it. And everyone around us, our families should know by example, what is the most important thing in our life. So the finest and the best should always be given first and foremost to Hashem. Okay, moving on. It says that you'll take of the first of all the fruit of your land. So there's an interesting juxtapositioning of this first mitzvah of this week, which is the first fruit, up against the very last storyline of last week, which was the story of Amalek. Amalek was a nation that attempted to destroy us in the desert. They were the precursor to terrorism in the world. They attacked the stragglers and the weak, and they undid so much of the luster and the glory of the Jewish people. And we were told that we have to never forget the assault and the attack of the nation of Amalek. But Amalek represented a certain attitude, and therefore the rabbis say that the fact that we begin this week's portion with the first fruit is in fact related to the last section of last week's portion. What Amalek was saying was there is this people that seem to be so holy and they seem to be so spiritually uplifted. We will show that they are nothing more than a people. And we will attack them. And we will undo this glory that is surrounding the Jewish people, that everyone has such reverence and respect for. We'll take out the holiness from that which is holy. We will show that what is previously seen as holy is actually a regular mundane nation. The attitude of Amalek was to strip the holy of its holiness. And therefore, the counter to that, how do we deal with an attitude that wants to take out God from everything in this world, from the experience of sensing and feeling godliness in this world? The response to that is to show that God is in nature. If you want to take God out of where he is so apparent, my response to that is to put God into that area where he's not apparent. The field, the trees, the produce, the work of my own sweat and brow, where I could imagine that it's because of what I gave and what I achieved. And that's what is important. So how do you counter an attitude that wants to delegitimize and to detract from the spiritual dimension of this world? The response to that is address the natural order and make it feel like a spiritual connection to Hashem. So to counter taking out God from the miracle, put God in the nature, in the natural event. And the bringing of Bikurim showed a relationship with God, not only when we were in Shul on Yom Kippur, but when we were in the field, when we were in business, when we were doing our regular mundane activities. There too, we found the presence of Hashem. Moving on to, still staying with the first fruits. So this is something that Chassidus deals with, and that is that it emphasizes that you'll stand in front of the Kohen, you'll take your first fruit, and the Kohen will take the basket from your hand. So the commentaries want to know, why does it speak about from your hand? I mean, he'll take the fruit from you. Why does he emphasize the hand? And Chassidus speaks about the fact that every single limb in the human body has a hierarchy of status and importance, and therefore is placed in a particular position in the order of the limbs. And therefore the head is on top. The head, which is meant to give direction and meant to evaluate choices and processing information, it is the most sensitive space of our whole entire body, and that's why it's on top. Below that is the heart. Because in a human being, the heart follows the mind. The mind is dictating and giving clarity which direction to go, and our emotions wake up and are inspired by the intellect that we have. And then there are the rest of the limbs which are functional. In fact, it speaks about melech, mem lamet chaf. Mem stands for moach, which is the mind, lamet stands for leib, which is the heart, and chaf, which stands for kaved, which is the liver, the filtration plant of the blood system to the rest of the body. And when we stand upright, we stand like a melech. A melech is a king. We are a king if we have an order to our lives. Our heads are on top and our hearts follow, and then there's the functionality of our body. Sometimes you have a person who behaves like an animal, which is governed by heart, not by mind. The mind is employed to follow the dictates of the heart. That's the general attitude of an animal. An animal says, I want to eat, or I want to do what I want to do, and the mind of the animal is going to take it where it has to go, to jump on a poor buck and eat it. So it has to construct, has to be very clever how to ambush the buck. The lion uses its head, it has a mind, but it's governed by its heart. When it's hungry, then it goes out to hunt. So that's a whole different hierarchy. That's called lemech, not melech, which is a king, but lemech, which is a clown. And the difference between a king and a clown is how we order the limbs of our body. But then there are the hands. And the question is, where do hands belong in the hierarchy of limbs? We know where our arms come out of just by our shoulder blades, but where do our hands belong? And we know the answer to that. Our hands are where we put them. We could put our hands way above our heads, And we could put our hands beneath our toes. We could speak about Al Asher Kidishanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu Hashem, you commanded me, Al netilat yadayim, on raising up my hands, which is what we do, say the blessing before we make hamotzi and eat bread. We cleanse our hands spiritually, and we speak about these hands have the capacity to do holy things. And then we have Hayadayim Yedei Esav. These hands are the hands of Esau, said Isaac, when he was confronted by his son and he wasn't sure who it was. The hands could be the hands of Esau, which are filled with blood. Yedeichem domim mileu. Your hands are filled with blood, which is a statement we say in English, an idiom which comes from the Tanakh, from our holy scriptures. So hands could be anywhere, because hands are where we choose to put them. They can be higher than our minds and lower than our most base elements. Where do we put them? And in a sense, the Kohen looks at this farmer and says, I'm taking the produce from your hands, because you have to always inspect the hands. What kind of hands were they that produced this produce? Did they lift up? Did they share? Did they care? Were they hands that were able to elevate everyone around you? Or were they hands that, God forbid, suppressed and pushed aside and hurt and maimed in the process of achieving success? So the hands are a very, very important part of our lives. We wash our hands. I don't have to tell you that this year. This year we've washed our hands more than we've washed our hands in our entire lives. But the Jews are always washing our hands. We wake up in the morning, the first thing is we say Modeh Ani, and then we wash our hands. We have a ritual way of washing our hands spiritually. We have to obviously have them cleaned anyway, but when we clean our hands before washing, when we wash for bread, it's not cleaning our hands, because they have to be clean before you even start the process. It's realizing that there is something spiritually uplifting that could be found in our hands. And we have to work out what hands we have and that we are utilizing to produce the successes of our life. It then says, I'm just saying this in passing, because the Rambam, we learned it in Maimonides just recently when we were learning the laws of the festivals. So it says that one of the laws of the festivals is that you should eat and drink and be merry. And you should be happy. So there are many laws that relate to sanctifying the Jewish festival and making it such a prominent time in our life that we are filled with joy and happiness, and therefore we have banquet meals, Shabbos, Yontif, and we should also feed the stranger, look after the orphan and the widow and other unfortunates. But he says, the Rambam says, what happens if you have a choice? And you've got to decide whether you're going to have one more course of gluttony for your Yontif meal, or you're going to invite guests. And you say to yourself, well, I actually don't want to invite this poor person because they're going to eat one more portion and I'm going to have less. I'd rather there's a mitzvah, I have to have a meal, I have to enjoy Yontif. And this person will deprive my joy of Yontif. So the Rambam says that is called the joy of the stomach. Which means don't confuse joy and joy. And we're going to get further into this theme. Don't think that joy means when you enjoy, when you're having a good time, and sometimes even at the expense of others. That's not called joy. The ultimate joy is when you're sharing and caring and giving. And therefore, the ultimate Yontif meal is when you have guests and you're taking care of those who are in need, which is the ultimate expression of the festival. Don't think that by eating another rib steak at the expense of a poor person who might have been invited, you've done anything for Yontif. You've just been self-centered and worrying about yourself rather than about the Yontif. So it gives us the first insight that we're going to step into relating to how do we define joy and differentiate between enjoy and joy. I want to just in passing speak about the fact that it says, Hayom hazeh niyeh salam, today you become a people. And Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who was the powerful foundation of the German Jewry at a time when many Jews were getting infatuated with modernism and reform and alternative methods of serving God, and the ancient traditions of the people were seen as antiquated and something that was not desirable. And he built German Jewry through those difficult times. He has wonderful insights into different parts of the Torah. And he says that it's interesting that when did we become a people? Most nations can attribute the date of being found as a people that relates either to culture or to language or to land. The core of nationhood would most likely be one or all of those three things. But that's not when we became a nation. In fact, when we became a nation, we didn't yet have a land. Our culture was beginning to be formed because we were only just then given the Torah. We were in the middle of the wilderness. And what it tells us that in the fact that we were established as a people, not by the conventional method of having won a war and established our borders, and that's when we became a nation. It wasn't through the power of the Romans, Lahavdil, or the Greeks, or the ancient Persians. It wasn't because of battles of war or territory that made us the nation that we are. We became a nation when we stood at Sinai and we received the Torah, the word of Hashem, and we became part of a mission. That defined the birth of our nationhood and will forever define how we retain nationhood. Everything else that could be important is always second to the essence of the definition of who we are as a nation, and we are a nation that are the children of Hashem. We Bnei Israel, we are the servants of Hashem. We became a nation on a desert mountain at Sinai. And we should never forget that that is the core of our nationhood. Okay, a very quick point, and then we'll get on to the main topic that we want to talk about. Rabbi Pshischa says, blessed are you. When it lists all the blessings, it says, Baruch atah ba'ir, Baruch atah b'sadeh. You are blessed in the city, you are blessed in the field. And he continues this theme that blessing is never found in isolation. Rabbi Pshischa says sometimes we think that we can find our blessings by hiding away in our own little corner and being able to live off the bounty of and the successes of our achievements. But that ultimately, Baruch atah, where are you blessed? Ba'ir, when you recognize your place in the city. Baruch atah b'sadeh, blessed are you when you're out there in the field, when you realize it's not only about you, but it's about the environment around you. It is necessary to find your joy and your happiness and your blessings amidst your people, not in isolation. That never allows us to be truly happy and truly blessed. So now we're going to get on to the subject, which is the Tochacha. And that's my trigger to talk a little bit about the concept of joy. Because all of these very heavy statements of what could God forbid befall the Jewish people if we don't follow in his ways, and the many curses and the many areas of suffering that could happen, as the verse says, and it shall come to pass, if you will not hearken to the word of Hashem, that all of these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Very heavy verses. So the story is told that when Reb Dov Ber, who was one of the Rebbes, was asked, on a particular year, he fainted. He heard the words, and it was just too much for him, and he fainted and he got sick. And for weeks, till well after Yom Kippur, he was in a deep situation of illness. And they said to him, how come when you heard the words this year you fainted and you fell ill? Don't you remember last year you also heard the same words? It's like the guy who thinks that the storyline is going to be different every year. We read the words with hopefully greater depth and understanding, but we read the same words last year. How come last year you didn't fall ill? And he said the Alter Rebbe, when the Alter Rebbe was the person who read that section of the Torah, I never heard the curses. Somehow he was able to give the deeper insight emerged even from the way he enunciated the words, and he said it, I heard blessing, I didn't hear curses, which comes to tell you that we are able to communicate in different ways. And sometimes we communicate the emphasis of negativity, and sometimes our whole life is so involved in positivity that we're always communicating energy that is positive and strength. And that is how we interpret and see the verses of the Torah. But moving on to the next element in the Tochacha, which is why do all of these curses befall the Jewish people? So it's just a very strange reference. Because you did not serve Hashem with happiness and with gladness of heart, in abundance of everything, therefore you shall serve your enemies, etc. It goes into all the curses. So it doesn't say because you didn't serve God. It says because you didn't serve God with happiness and with gladness of heart. So Chassidus says that the sin that we're talking about is not necessarily the actual sin. Sometimes we could do even something that in itself is not a sin. But if we don't have the joy and the happiness that it should infuse the moment, so that is the shortcoming that triggers the pain of life. So hidden in these words is saying, it's not saying that because you were so evil and you did something so terrible and therefore you might even have been on the right path, but you didn't serve God with joy. And that was the key element that began to unravel your life. Hashem says to the Jewish people, there has to be joy. And that's what I wanted to share a few important moments about the importance and the centrality of joy in our lives. Although it says in the Torah, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, you should serve God with joy, it doesn't actually say that there is a prohibition about being sad. Melancholy is not one of the 613 or one of the negative prohibitions that you're not allowed to be in a state of melancholy. But Chassidus always said that whilst in itself it isn't measured as a specific Aveira, sin, it is the cause and the reason that a person could fall into a life of mistakes, of missed opportunities, and of deficiency because of the attitude. And how important it is to have an attitude of joy. And then a few words of how we can help ourselves get there. In the holy book of the Tanya, it speaks about the fact that sometimes if a person is feeling apathetic and lethargic, which often is the outcome of depression, then what could happen is you could otherwise have won the war. You could have been strong. You could have been superior. You could have been the winner. But you lost not because you didn't have the ability, but because you had an attitude that painted you as a loser. And the Alter Rebbe gives the analogy of two wrestlers in the ring. And you're placing your bets, and you want to know who's going to be the winner. And the one is the Hulk. He's much stronger. You can see that he has the muscle power. The other one does not have the skills and does not have the strength. But there could be a moment, and there could be a fight, where the underdog does something incredible and wins the battle. And what it had to do, as every coach will tell us, when it comes to sport, it comes to where's your headspace, where's your concentration, did you have your mind in the game? The difference between a Messi in soccer on a day and another day was his concentration in the same place, was his mind in place to be a winner. And when a person like Federer gets on the court, he sometimes loses to somebody who's not nearly as strong as him as a player. And we say, well, it was his day, or it was her day. But the day was often determined by where we are in our headspace. We've spoken about so often. The battle that happens before the battle. Before we actually fight, we have to know where our head is in order to enable us to win the battle. So what is important is that the state of mind of joy, or God forbid the opposite, could be the catalyst for untold grief. There isn't a particular sin in being melancholy, but it is the cause of all sin, or most sins. because you give up and you don't believe in yourself and you don't think it matters and you think you're worthless and you don't realize how important and how much is dependent on you. And that's a journey of simcha, of joy. And we shouldn't confuse joy. We often think, as we said before, that joy means that we enjoy, we have a good time. How do you be happy? You go to the movie and you go to watch a concert and you feel good, and that makes you happy. And we know that it can make you feel in a good mood for the moment, but it changes nothing in one's life. I remember, and I've referenced that 4th of July I was in America, and Fagi and I went to the family to watch the fireworks display, which was on the East River near Manhattan. And at that time, Macy's had a barge that they pulled out into the river, and they blew up something like $3 million of fireworks in front of us. And all the little cul-de-sacs that ended on the edge of Brooklyn overlooking towards Manhattan was filled with people, and they were, I wouldn't say braaiing, they were barbecuing, and they were having the time of their life, and they were waiting for this all-important moment when you could not imagine the joy of watching all of this fireworks go up. And it was spectacular. The night sky was magnificent. I mean, $3-4 million, work it out in Rand, was a lot of stuff to blow up. It was like the paramaniacs were having a whole celebration. This was like the most, but then it finished. And we all walked back to our cars. And there was a somber silence as everybody walked away from the event in which $3 or $4 million was blown up in front of our eyes. And that was it. One didn't see a jump in the step of people walking away from an event that was a life-changing catalyst for joy. Enjoy means you're in the moment and you have a good time and you feel good and you numb yourself from the pain or you distract yourself from whatever is bothering you, and therefore you enjoy. Joy is a totally different process. Do you remember there was a song a long time ago which was, don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy. It was a whole song about don't worry, be happy. You want to be happy, just stop worrying. Just don't get involved. Don't even think about the problems, and then you're happy. And if we think about the process from a Jewish point of view, how do we get to joy? Which is the festival of our joy? Zman Simchaseinu, the time and season of our joy. When does it happen in the Jewish calendar year? It happens in the Jewish calendar year after the month of Elul, which we're presently in, after Rosh Hashanah, when we've stood in front of Hashem, when Hashem has judged us, and we felt the importance of standing in front of Hashem who is judging us. We go through Yom Kippur and we cleanse ourselves, and we rid ourselves of all of the impurities of life. And once you've been through a resolution of the issues of one's life, then comes Man Simchatenu. In fact, the wording of the song would be worry, be happy. Not worry just for the sake of worrying, but serious introspection, resolution of issues, addressing one's life, making sure that we could lift ourselves and change and not be stuck. Those are all the elements that contribute to joy. When can we really be happy? When we're not loaded down by all the baggage of the past and all the anxieties and all the guilt and regret and all the things that we carry around year after year after year, but we've addressed it and we've said, I know where I stand, I know who I am, and this is what I'm going to do about it tomorrow. My famous teacher in Chabad, I've mentioned last week and so often, Reb Mendel Futterfass, he always used to say that there is a hair's breadth difference between abandonment and joy. Two people, you could see them dancing, and you could say, well, this guy's happy and that guy's happy. But the one guy is in a total drunken stupor and abandonment, he's given up, he's not even thinking about anything, and he looks happy. And there's another guy who's dancing on Simchas Torah with the Torah, and the way they're dancing, they look almost identical. There's a hair's breadth difference. And in the same way, he used to say, if you look at a guy on the serious night of Kol Nidre, or on Yom Kippur in the most serious moment, and you see somebody who's depressed, and you look at their face, they both have tears in their eyes, they're both looking very sullen, and you could hardly tell the difference. There's a hair's breadth between people in totally different worlds, stratospheres. So how would you know the difference? How would you know if you're depressed or if you're in a serious moment of introspection? And he used to always say the answer is, what is tomorrow? What's born out of it? What comes out of it? If a person is in a state of depression, the next morning, he's not going to be able to lift his head out of the bed. He's going to want to just stay indoors. He can't face the world. But the person who's come out of a Yom Kippur, the next morning he jumps out of bed earlier than ever to the minyan. His seriousness wasn't one of resignation. It was process. It was dealing with issues and coming to understand the deeper relationship that he has with his Creator, with his Father, with his King. And he is empowered by the process of introspection. The person who is dancing with the Torah and Simchas Torah reaches a point where we're told that Simcha Poretz Geder, a person in a state of joy is able to achieve things and do things that they would never normally do. They give more, they share more, they have a commitment that's more. That is when it's joy, that is meant to be joy. If a guy is just simply in a drunken stupor dancing around some pagan idol, that's not going to make that person be wanting to give more and to share more tomorrow. So sometimes it's very hard to know where we're at. Is it real joy, or is it just simply an enjoy? Is it a distraction? And the joy that comes through a Rosh Hashanah and a Yom Kippur means that we are delving into a relationship. Why can we be happy in every situation in life? As it says in the Torah, Kashem Shemavarchin ala Tov, in the same way as we should have a blessing for the good things that happen to us, we should bless even for the things that are painful. And there was a famous chassid that went to the Mitzvah Rebbe, one of the great Rebbes, and he said to him, what does that mean? How can you bless God the same way as you bless God for the things that go easy and happy for us? We should bless God even in the situations of pain. I can't understand how to do that. He said, go to Zusha. Zusha is the guy who will teach you. He's the master teacher of how to be able to bless and be happy even in a moment of difficulty and challenge. So he sets out and he goes to find Reb Zusha, and by the time he finds his house, it's a broken down hovel where the person, Zusha, was living with less than nothing. He was absolutely impoverished. He had the poorest of the poor surroundings in his home, broken down shack. And he comes to Reb Zusha and he says, I've come to you because you're the teacher. Zusha says, I'm the teacher. I've never been a teacher. Yeah, the Mitzvah Rebbe said, I've come to you. What am I going to teach you? You're going to teach me how to bless God even in a situation of pain. And Reb Zusha said to him, I'm absolutely dumbfounded. I don't know how I could be the one to teach you that. I've never suffered in my life. And the wealthy person who had maybe had a few losses of a few deals in his life, which had completely undone him, was now confronted with a person who had less than nothing and was happy. Because contentment and joy isn't through the things that we own, as we often think it is. We'll buy a nicer house, we'll get a nicer car, we'll get a new suit, and then we'll be happy. All the advertisements tell us that. They tell us you only need to buy my product, and then you're going to be the happiest guy in the world. The images tell you, you drive into the sunset, and you're the happiest guy, and they lived happily ever after. And that's not exactly what happens. Because the real happiness comes through recognizing who we are and how we have a relationship with something that transcends us and that is infinite, and that we have a real connection. If we would feel that God is at our side every single moment, that He loves us. Not only does He love us, He needs us. He needs us because He put us here to fulfill His mission. And little me, with all of my mistakes and all of my weaknesses, and all of my failures, little me is who God has given a mission and put me here to achieve something in this world. And if I felt that proximity to Hashem in every single moment of our life, we will never feel abandoned. L'ra'iti, as we say in benching, tzaddik ne'ezav, I've never seen a righteous person who was forsaken. And people ask, what do you mean? You haven't seen righteous people suffer? That we've seen. We've seen righteous people suffer. But I've never seen a righteous person forsaken, because he never has felt, even in whatever moment he goes through, that he has been abandoned by God. There's a relationship with Hashem. And therefore, in every single moment of our life, we count the blessing of a finite human being having the capacity to connect to an infinite God and having a relationship with Hashem and sensing Hashem at our side. If we can focus and create that relationship, when we put on our tefillin, when we light our Shabbat candles, when we do a mitzvah and we feel this is little me in this corner of the world, being the instrument of Hashem's mission, the creator of the entire universe, in fulfilling a purpose in this world. That empowering moment says, I matter, I'm needed, I have a responsibility, I have a job to do, I am loved. That is the source of our joy, so that we can be happy even when things don't go the way we wanted them to go. May Hashem give us the year ahead that is filled with so much blessing that we have all the things that we want from Hashem. May that be revealed good. We should see the goodness in everything. It should be a Shana Tova, umetuka, sweet, with all the blessings of Hashem. But the
Amen.
real wealthy, happy person is the person that is able to look at every element of life and say, this too is from Hashem. This too is part of my relationship from Hashem. And I want to be happy. I will be happy, and therefore my day is going to be that kind of day that is born out of success rather than out of depression and negativity. I leave you there because the hour of 8 o'clock has arrived. May it be a happy night and a happy week, and please God, a happy year that lies ahead. Thank you for joining, and thank you for being here. There is a magnificent shir that is being given. I think it's being hosted by the base, by Rabbi Simon Jacobson, which started about 2 minutes ago. So if you still got any energy left in you, you might want to go and listen to that too. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.